Hey everybody, it's Mr. Caudale. I hope you're doing well. I'm just hanging on. I wish everyone was doing better. Good news is we're coming down to the end here. Um, we've learned a lot in this semester, and I'm going to go over right now what you're going to need to know for the final exam in this class. You should have this piece of paper. It's up here on the screen. If you don't have it, you can definitely take a picture of the screen. This is representative of the 12 state standards that we went over this semester. That's not true though, because we didn't go over a few of them. Let me go to the next page here. Make sure you take a picture of this if you need to. You can cross out number 12, evaluate data and assumptions regarding different scenarios for future human population growth. We never got to that. Also, at the top one, number 10, you can cross out where it says keystone. But we did talk about introducing non-native species into an ecosystem. What's going to happen here is that your final exam is going to be those 11 questions. Essentially, if you get rid of number 12 here, I'm going to turn these into a question, or if it says evaluate data, I'm going to give you a graph of data. I'm going to do something so that you can show me that you can do these state standards. That's it. So come ready to write, come ready with some blank paper, and I'm just going to hand these to you. There's no trickery here. Here are the questions for your final. Um, and then you just write. You tell me all you know, and then you go off into the sunset, and everything's good. But we're going to go here first. We're going to start with what we started with in January, which is meiosis and genetic recombination, is what it's called. Here's the first state standard. So you can follow along on this piece of paper, number 14, and maybe write some notes. Explain using, how genetic mutations. Okay, good. How genetic mutations can benefit, harm, or have a neutral effect on an organism. About that for a second. What would you say right now? Or what would you write if this was your question right now off the top of your head? I think in order to go forward here, we have to go backwards. And we need to think about genes themselves and Punnett squares, because Punnett squares was a big part of this. The idea in a Punnett square is that you have genes from mom, which she got from her parents, in this case, the big E and the little e, and genes from dad, maybe on the side there, in this case, that he got from his parents, a big E and a little e. Those are the only genes that are available when sperm or eggs, are made. You get them from your parents, or in this case, the grandparents. Those genes that are available, and then through meiosis, you create sperm or eggs which just have one of those genes. And the idea is you don't want both the genes from the grandparents coming in, because we would have too many genes. So we're just going to randomly choose through meiosis one of the two for each characteristic, and then those are going to come together, and you can see then the four potential offspring gene combinations there in that Punnett square. Well, if we put the egg and the sperm together and we get a genetic combination, remember that's just information. Those are DNA bits. And remember what happens to the information from DNA that exists in the nucleus. It gets transcribed into RNA, still in the nucleus, that then migrates out to the cytoplasm. And we see that message then being translated into a sequence of amino acids, which are folded in the Golgi bodies to create functional protein. And so, therefore, I've written down there at the bottom, big E in parentheses, in question, whatever those are, quotations. The idea is that you can say, well, someone has a big letter E and it's going to dominate over the recessive little letter E. And that's fine. That's the gene. But what really matters is what that then creates. What is the product that's made as a result of that DNA that we call big letter E being transcribed and translated? What's it going to do for the body? So let's go back here. And the idea is that how can genes, let me get this right, genetic mutations can benefit, harm, or have neutral effects. So here's an instance where it might have a harmful effect. So you have a gene, it's now been mutated, and we might not get a protein that is shaped correctly, and we might not be able to do something like see as well, or hear as well, or digest food as well, or whatever that may be. We started out this semester doing this activity where we looked at chromosomes and we talked about genetic mutations on those chromosomes. Remember, chromosomes are just big, long strands of DNA. And in particular places called genes, sometimes when you have a mutation, then that leads to a misshapen protein, and there are disease states as a result of that. And you did a project on this. Well, in some instances, genetic mutations can actually have a neutral effect on an organism. And an example would be that if you have a genetic mutation, it leads to a different letter in the DNA sequence, which leads to a different letter in the RNA sequence. But when the ribosomes go to translate that RNA into a bunch of amino acids to fold into becoming a protein out in the cytoplasm, if the ribosomes interpret that DNA mutation as having the same amino acid as it would have had, then often the organism doesn't even know that there's a DNA mutation. And you can see that here, that at least with the third letter in the RNA codon, which is what it's called, just if there's three letters in a row that make a bit of RNA that then's translated, and through translation, an amino acid is brought in there by a ribosome, put in a sequence. As long as you have the same amino acid, it doesn't really matter if there was a mutation on the DNA which led to a change on the RNA or not. That's a neutral effect there. A beneficial effect might be when you do have a DNA mutation, there is a brand new amino acid that's put into a sequence, and it actually makes the organism better. What if it can see better or digest food better or hear better? And these then might give that newly formed organism a benefit in its environment, and maybe it goes on to reproduce better, eat more food, have more success, and maybe after a while, then that becomes the dominant gene. I guess we would call it a mutation, but it's just a difference in the gene now that might even be the thing that's dominant in the society, the organism's population. Well, the next state standard here is explain how cells form specialized tissues due to the expression of some genes and not others. Well, it's the same thing. I guess that goes along with the dominant and recessive genes. That's the easiest way to think about this, that sometimes we get genes from our parents for certain traits, but they're dominated against. Some genes are expressed, and that would be the dominant gene. The way that we looked at this was we did an experiment where we created babies, and some of your babies were really ugly. Sorry. Just kidding. I mean, not really. We made a baby, and so that's how we kind of, in practice, doing an activity, tried to satisfy this state standard and enable you to explain how this happened. Variations on a human face. It's a cute face. Well, let's go up to the top where it says evolution on your little sheet there. This says generate a model, an evolutionary tree showing how a group of organisms is most likely to diverge from common ancestry. So you had to create an evolutionary tree. And what I determined was the easiest way to do this was to use your stuff from the human evolution. We started with Lucy. We watched that movie. We created this big, long evolutionary tree. And so you were able to do it. And so on the final exam, I'm going to give you this question, and you just need to be able to generate an evolutionary tree, and you need to show how a group of organisms is most likely to diverge from common ancestry. Now, you could do octopus or whales or whatever. That's fine. I would recommend you keep it as simple as possible and just do the one you've already done, which is Lucy, because you will show that you can satisfy the state standard. Remember, we watched the movie. We had this Australopithecus afarensis, africanus. We had Boisei, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and so on. And what we tried to do was we tried to create an evolutionary tree that looked like this. And what's important there is, you can see that between each bifurcation to two new species, there's a characteristic that's labeled there, and that's the thing that's different, meaning that's what now the new organisms have, which now give it a benefit in its environment, and everyone downstream also has that. But upstream of that, or previous in history of that mutation leading to a new characteristic being created, the organisms didn't have that. You can read this, see this here. So let me go back. You can draw something like this, generate an evolutionary tree, or you can generate one like this. Don't use the smiley face and stuff. Make sure that you have some specific names of organisms that had evolved between Lucy and Homo sapiens and the reasons why they evolved. You can ask me for help if you'd like. Let's keep going. Oh, this says discuss how all species are related via common ancestry. I'm just reading state standard number 2, comparative anatomy, biogeography, the fossil record, and embryology. And if you recall, we actually did an activity where we went over each of these. You read about it, it's in the textbook. And we did this activity where we had 4 different tables where you studied how different scientists did their jobs. And we went over these things, common ancestry, comparative anatomy, and so on. And the idea was we were trying to make an argument for evolution. This is what Darwin did in his book on the origin of species. He tried to make an argument, and he needed to put all this data and experimental, examples together, and that's what he did using these tips. You might recall doing this. I'll show you in the book where all this information is. Well, let's keep going. We only have one more in evolution that we got to go over. This says discuss how over geologic time, discrete bursts of rapid genetic changes and gradual changes have resulted in speciation. So think about this. Geologic time means crazy amounts of time, millions of years. There's been bursts of rapid genetic change through DNA mutation, and then that has resulted in speciation. It's less about gradual change, to be honest with you. Let me give you an example. Remember when that asteroid, the KT asteroid, hit off of the Yucatan Peninsula, it kicked up all this dust, killed a lot of plants, which then led to a toxic oxygen-reduced environment, atmosphere, as well as a lot of food was gone, and the dinosaurs really struggled because they were meat eaters, super inefficient at the top of the trophic level pyramids, and there wasn't much for them to eat around. But the little organisms like these rat-looking dudes that were mammals, that were plant eaters at the time, they were able to survive, scurry in the shadows, and then once all those organisms left, it died, all these species of dinosaurs died, the mammals then found a brave new world that was wide open, and they were able to then colonate and populate. And here we are, and zebras and giraffes and lions, all these mammals came from those early descendants. So often geologic change, which is like from volcanoes or tsunamis or uplifting of mountains or big events like this, that leads to changes in the environment. And then that allows organisms that are better suited in those new environments to have an advantage and then eventually become the dominant forms in those new environments. So that would be evolutionary change. If you recall, we did this with a bunch of these little pieces of paper that we folded and we put up in a line. And I wanted you to make the connection between geologic change, environmental change, and then evolutionary change. Well, we're getting close to finishing here. If you notice, let's go to matter and energy and ecosystems. What I'm doing here is I'm looking at this piece of paper, and I'm on number 5 there, analyze how energy flows through trophic levels. I'm not going to go over this. We've done this 1,000 times, and so if you make sure you got that down, you have to draw me a trophic level diagram and analyze how energy is flowing through the 10% rule, through the producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and so on. You can show that sun is at the bottom, and that's the ultimate source of new energy that's necessary because energy is always being lost as heat. Let's go to number 7, compare and contrast matter and energy and how they're cycled or lost through life processes. Let's go back here. You just talked about energy. I would then say, as far as matter goes, you can draw that circle that's on there, and you could say, matter recycles through all of these, levels in this trophic level diagram, and that whenever anything dies, they get decomposed, all the atoms go into the soil, and then new things take up those atoms and are created, and the process begins again and again. Number 8 says, describe how carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and water cycles work. Here's a picture of the carbon cycle. Make sure you got all those down. You're just going to have to draw them for me. This also deals with number 9. You don't have to reproduce it. Discuss the interdependence of autotrophic and heterotrophic life forms. That just means plants and animals, essentially, while depicting the flow of the carbon atom from the atmosphere to a leaf through the food chain and back to the atmosphere. You can see that right here. Well, I'm not going to show you number 10 because we're in that current unit right now, but make sure that you can talk about the introduction of non-native species into an ecosystem. You can use the cane toad as an example and talk about the impact of that. Number 11 is evaluate communities in terms of primary and secondary succession. I've had you read about this, and we'll talk a little bit about it in class. You got to know what primary and secondary succession is. I did a lecture on it that you watched. Excuse me, and you don't have to do number 12. Your final exam should be that simple. I'm not kidding. There's no trickery here. Like I said, I just want you to show me that you can do those state standards. That's what you need to study. I would say don't really look at the ladder book. I know that that's in class. I guess you could use some class time to do that. But more importantly is this stuff over here in the Bird book. All of these pages are in the Schoology account. You've read them all. These are the pages for evolution. These are the pages for matter and energy and ecosystems. These are the pages, just look at the bird stuff in populations. And then here are the pages again. So the point is you can take a picture of any of this stuff. Make sure you study these things. I'm not looking for a bunch of garbage. This is your final exam in a high school class. So give me good solid paragraphs. You should write for at least an hour. Draw pictures and write for an hour. You don't have to write me a page for each of them, but definitely I don't want to see a sentence or 2 or 3. I want to see more than that. Supplement it with examples, supplement it with pictures, whatever you got to do. I believe in you. You've done a great job this semester. Good luck.